Hello, my name is Thomas and welcome to this episode of British Culture, Albion Never Dies. Today, I am talking to Bill Koenig of the Spy Command, fantastically knowledgeable man about James Bond, spy films in general, spy TV shows, and the state of the movie industry in general. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it very, very much. Okay, so Mr. Koenig, thank you very, very, very much for joining me. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm Bill Koenig. I do a blog called The Spy Command. It's primarily a James Bond blog. That's certainly the majority of the copy, but I get into other spy things and occasionally branch it to things like comic book movies just because there's so many of them and they've had such an impact. But I don't do a whole lot on the comic book things, but when they're making billions of dollars in box office, I sort of feel the need to at least make a note of it.
It's hard not to acknowledge it at some level,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
And it's a very regularly updated blog. I mean, I follow it, and it's great updates on what's happening out there in the film world and the world of film spies.
I try. It's we're in a little bit of a lull right now. Bond, is the most recent Bond, is kind of exited theaters now and is in home video. But and they had The King's Man came out. It had sort of bad timing when its release date was because it got kind of swamped by speaking of comic book movies, Spider-Man: No Way Home.
Yeah,
but it's something I want to catch up on because I saw the first two Kingsman movies in the theaters. I have kind of mixed feelings about them, but they are interesting. Matthew Vaughn, sometimes seems to go a little overboard on the violent stuff for my taste.
Yeah,
but it's interesting. I should probably also catch up on the 355, which came and disappeared.
You go first, and you tell me how it is.
Okay, I'll let you know. I gotta find it first. I assume I can get it on streaming.
Yes,
but
very quickly. Robert Vaughn is interesting, the director of Kingsman, because he also did a comic book movie as well. So he does cross the divide.
Well, you mean Matthew Vaughn? Matthew Vaughn, who thought Robert Vaughn was his father, but turned out he wasn't, because apparently Robert Vaughn had an affair with Matthew Vaughn's mother, and so he thought he was like his father, but then it turned out he couldn't because physical reasons.
Oh gosh. Well, there's a plot twist for a spy film.
Yeah, supposedly, I saw this interview with an American producer who had once written for The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He was telling the story about this in this interview. And so supposedly one of the British tabloids had a headline, "The Man from U.N.C.L.E. shoots blanks." But Vaughn did live in England for a while, the late 60s into the early 70s. He did a show there called The Protectors, which was a Lord Grade show. ITC, I think was his company. It was Robert Vaughn and Nairi Dawn Porter, and the show was syndicated on over here in the U.S. as well. I watched it some because I remember in the titles they used footage out of From Russia with Love in the titles. It was from the helicopter attack and the sequence where Bond's driving the flower truck and the helicopter kind of dive bombs it, and so they use a shot from it in the titles. I guess, I don't know, I guess they could buy it and get
I hope they got approval.
Well, I would think so. I mean, there was some other movie, I couldn't tell you the name of it, but it was some kind of cheap science fiction adventure show. And I recognized a shot, involved a satellite in space. And I recognized the shot. It was from Diamonds Are Forever. It's
wow.
Do they have a side business of selling scenes for people to, I don't know how that works, but I assume it had to be.
Is this Amazon's future for James Bond? You buy it shot for shot now.
Yeah, that's right. But
Wow. That's really interesting that they were selling it off, or literally selling off shots. I assume selling.
I assume, yeah, I assume they had to have paid for it in some fashion, but
Yeah.
I don't know the details. But I just, I definitely, I mean, there's no mistake. It's definitely the, it's not, in the case of the flower truck, it's clearly it's from that movie. It's
Yes, it's a very different era in terms of use of stock footage.
yes, yes,
But I tend to think of, say 50s films going out into the jungle where you might have the actors on set and then a quick cut to some very beautiful nature footage.
yes. And even in the Bond movies, You Only Live Twice, the beginning of You Only Live Twice, there's some kind of stock footage of like the mission control.
Oh, yes, yeah.
It's and I wonder if they got it from like a NASA contractor or something. But anyway, but yeah, it's clearly stock footage. It's because it's a little grainier than the stuff they shot themselves.
Still magnificent films, and they made quite an impact.
Yeah, yeah.
You were in, as I recall, from the ground floor. Is that right? That you caught the Bond craze very
Close
early on.
close to it. I came in along with Thunderball.
Oh, right, okay.
Because I was a fan of The Man from Uncle, and my first exposure to Bond was they preempted the show one week to show this TV special, The Incredible World of James Bond, and it made a big impact on me. It's like, oh, I gotta go see this. And I finally did. It wasn't right away because it came out at Christmas, and I saw it at a drive-in. It had to have been in the spring because my vaguest memory of it was the weather was reasonably warm. So yes, it had to, so it wasn't like right away, but it would have been
Thunderball is the warm weather
66.
film.
Yes, yes.
So, why did it hit with you? What was it about Thunderball that really resonated?
Well, I've thought about this a lot. I think, and I've written this in the blog, you know, in the fall of 65, spies were everywhere on both sides of the Atlantic. And, there were a number of TV shows here in the States. But Thunderball gave you something you could not get on TV. And, that jetpack, the underwater fight. I know a lot of younger fans, oh, that fight's so slow, the underwater stuff's so slow. But I mean, at the time, that just seemed utterly amazing that they could do so much underwater like that. And that fight, there's one shot in particular still kind of gets me, where at some point in the fight, one of the good guys in the orange wetsuits grabs one of the bad guys, and he's supposed to be like cutting his throat, and you can't see anything, but there's this sound effect. It's like, ooh, it still kind of gets to me that, all these years later. But yeah, I think that was it. And then, I saw every one from then on in the theater or drive-in.
Were you able to catch up on the early Connery era? How did you get hold of them?
Well, back in those days, there was no home video, so they like re-released movies on as double features. So for example, I'm pretty sure it was 1971, they had a Dr. No from Russia with Love double feature, and that was not the first time they'd put that double feature out. So I mean, yeah, that was that's how you did it, was when the re-releases, and of course, like I said, you had no home video, so if you wanted to see it again, you had to head out to those double features. I've researched this, and this is not necessarily a comprehensive list, but they did one as early as 65. They did Dr. No from Russia with Love. It's a double feature. Goldfinger was this huge hit. And then in 66, they had Goldfinger, Dr. No as a double feature. And in 68, they had Thunderball and From Russia with Love double feature. And I remember seeing, it was when I finally had a chance to see it again. It was in 1970, they had a double feature of, they showed You Only Live Twice first, I assume because it was the more recent of the two, but Um, but yeah, You'll Live Twice in Thunderball. And I
All right.
remember I grew up in a college town. I was at the theater watching this double feature, and I forget which one. It probably was Thunderball. And I think these women, they were older than me. I assume they were kind of college co-eds, but it's a vague memory. But but one of them said, "Oh, he's got such a hairy chest." Uh,
He does.
yeah. Well, that used to be a thing. And Connery helped champion that, I think.
Well, yes. I guess when the world's biggest movie star has such a distinctive feature.
Yeah, and I mean, growing up, kids were told, eat this, it'll put hair on your chest.
Yeah.
Now it's like, well, it's not considered so desirable. But,
Yeah. I found that really interesting about all the multiple showings. We were just talking earlier about is it called the 355 that's just come and gone in cinemas. We're not going to catch it again. It's going to be really hard. It didn't hit in the first week or two, so now it's gone.
Right.
Sorry if you were busy moving house or starting a new job, but you just missed it.
And in 1972, because I watched this one. So this summer 1972 was just before the Bond movies were going to go on television for the first time. So they had a triple feature at drive-ins. The tagline was "Spend the Night with James Bond." So it was Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger. Now, the Goldfinger print was really, really beat up. I mean, to show you how beat up it was, there was like this cut from like the middle of the title sequence to suddenly, it's Bond in the terry cloth thing, watching Goldfinger play cards. Like, I mean, that's a huge gap, obviously. So sometimes you went to these double features, and like I said, the prints were kind of nicked up. Not so much as that Goldfinger one, but
that's exceptional.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of moving forward into the 70s into a very different tone of Bond film, especially heading towards The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker and so on. Did you stay with that? Because I've heard of some fans who kind of have come closer and further away from the films as the tone has varied.
I stayed with it because I had initially missed Roger Moore getting cast. And I was convinced Diamonds Are Forever. That was it. Things done. And then friend said, no, they're making another one. Oh. And so I caught up with, it was Time magazine, and they had like a 3-page spread. It was like 1 page of text and 2 pages of photos. And the photos were taken, must have been primarily in the New Orleans shoot, because it was like Roger Moore Bond kicking a guy to get away from him and stuff like that. But so that was, and there was also a TV special. This must have been, guessing it was like the spring of 73. It was a Paul McCartney TV special. And so for one segment of this special, he said, it begins with, it's supposed to be inside a movie theater, and they flicker the light to make it look like, movies being projected, and Paul and Linda McCartney are eating popcorn as if they were in the theater. And so McCartney says, "I'm doing the music for the new James Bond." Well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the title song's pretty significant. And then and you hear the song and you see clips from the movie. So it's like, getting. So I was rather excited to see that, and so I hung through. But I know what you mean, because I saw an interview with Raymond Benson, the continuation author, and of course he also got the bug early. He got a little earlier than me. He's a couple of years older than I am, but I know he came in by Goldfinger, and I'm in this interview, and it's I want to say it's been within the last 12 months. He said that he kind of stopped watching him when they went that much lighter tone, and that he did not get his interest revived until 1981
Mm.
when you had For Your Eyes Only, which was a much, down to earth film. A lot of, well, a significant portion of two short stories adapted, for it, and also the first John Gardner novel.
Mm.
And so suddenly, the literary bond had been revived. They had done Colonel's Son, but then that they didn't seem anxious to repeat or do another, because I think the original, Kingsley Amis wrote it, but it says Robert Markham. And I think the idea originally was they would have different authors who would all do it under the Robert Markham name.
Ah.
But they just did the one, and then it wasn't, took another 3 years before they got the literary series going again. So 81, the summer of 81 was a pretty exciting time, because, For Your Eyes Only was kind of a back to basics film. You had the actual reference to Tracy's death on the headstone. You had that weird sort of Blofeld guy.
The not Blofeld for legal reasons, man.
Right, you're right. Which, I don't know if you know this, in the script, there was a line by him saying that this was the 10th anniversary of our last encounter, which of course would make that 71 and Diamonds Are Forever. But that line got snipped. I know this is getting too close. I assume that's why they snipped it, but it was in the Marvel Comics did an adaptation of the film,
right.
And that line's in the comic adaptation, because they've got to get advanced scripts to make sure that the publication comes out when the movie comes out. That's how I found out about it. Was reading the comic book adaptation.
It's very interesting, and what we have instead is the delicatessen in stainless steel line.
Yeah, which apparently is some kind of mafia reference of some sort. And
yes,
because I know Richard Maybaum, he said, I didn't write that. That wasn't me. He made sure everybody knew that.
What is it when your criminal language is so accurate, just the audience doesn't get it?
Yeah.
I realize we skipped through it and missing out George Lazenby at all.
I saw George in the theater. My mother took me to see it. So that was, the first two I saw, were Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, and those were both at drive-in. So On Her Majesty's Secret Service was the first time I saw it in an indoor theater, and it would have been very first run. It was around Christmas time, and now in my house, we watched the Avengers. So it's like, and it's like, okay, it's a new guy. That's fine. At least we're, Sean doesn't want to do it anymore. Well, that's okay. This guy does. And plus, we got Diana Rigg. Oh, this is wonderful. And then, that ending, like, what? I didn't know the ending. And I was, it was a long drive home.
Yes, it's a shocker. For the most Christmassy movie.
Yes.
It's a shocker.
Well, my father had read the book. He'd read a number of them. I don't know if he read all of them, but he read at least some, and he had read that one. And so when I get home, he said, well, Bill, so how'd it go? I was distraught, and well, that's kind of the way it goes. You don't always get what you want.
Yeah. That's so true to the book, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I have argued that it's the most faithful. I mean, there's changes. Some sequences are changed in order. The wedding, is made more elaborate with all the flowers and stuff. But that's
there's what works on screen and what works in a little novella. So.
Yeah, because I think in the book, he got married at the Justice of the Peace or something like that. And
it's the bond of the book's avoiding publicity, right, and avoiding the big events he doesn't like.
Yeah. But no, it was but then suddenly you didn't hear anything from George for a while after
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and I know there's been it. I mean, he talked about it. You know, they've only had two official James Bond fan conventions. One in '94 in Los Angeles, one in '95 in New York. I attended both. George was there for the '94, and you know, because I remember when I first saw the material, originally Roger Moore was supposed to be there as well. I'm thinking, well, you know, two of the four James Bonds are going to be there. Guy got to go. And then Roger Moore canceled out. And I said, well, there's still one. And I got a non-refundable airline ticket, so I'm still going. um, I think the reason was, I read this much later. So they were going to give Albert R. Broccoli an award, but his health precluded that. So
Right.
without, you know, and Roger Moore would have given him the award. So with that part of the program canceled, he canceled his appearance. So it wasn't Roger Moore being
Yeah.
obnoxious or anything. It was just, you know, the reason he was going to go, that reason evaporated. So,
Mm.
um, but it was interesting, and you had a video at the, you know, the '94 thing. They're both just one day, and toward the end of the '94 one, I remember there was a video with Pierce Brosnan, and he was in the set that looked like it was supposed to be M's office, and he made a brief talk. They also then had this video, a separate video. Here's some of the things you can look forward to in Goldeneye. And one thing is, you'll see the newest Aston Martin. Well, that changed after the convention, obviously, because I think I read that there was a new studio guy, and it's like, you know, we could get a lot more mileage with a more popular car. So that's when they struck the deal with BMW
Okay.
to get that uh, convertible, which was hardly in the movie at all. But and also they were going to have that thing with you know, suspended from a helicopter, these saws that used to cut high trees.
Mm.
Well, that didn't make the movie either. So, but obviously it did later with The World Is Not Enough. So it was kind of my, you know, chance to see firsthand, oh, things can change right up to the last minute, because
Yeah.
like I said, this was like Halloween weekend of '94, and they would have started filming, I think, very, you know, right after the first of the year in '95. So yeah, they were obviously still making changes with in pre-production.
We've been hearing that recently, right, with No Time to Die, of things being written on the day.
Yeah, yeah, and well, and also with Tomorrow Never Dies,
Mm.
there was a lot of that as well, because it started with Bruce Fairstein, a bunch of other guys came in, and then they brought him back at the end, and they were like, uh, Fairstein in particular was, you know, he's doing stuff the night before. Yeah, it is amazing how kind of last minute stuff happens with these movies.
Yeah. You'd
Um,
think having so many years experience that they'd be on it.
yeah, but the '94 '95 things were very, I mean, it was very exciting as a Bond fan, because you know, you'd had that long hiatus. It was very complicated to follow the legal issues involved. I mean, I tried, you know, you know, so you didn't have the internet, and
Mm.
so news kind of rolled out gradually, and like, I mean, I had a subscription at the time to the Wall Street Journal, and I found out half of what was going on through that. Um, yeah, but it was, but just the issues involved were just so complicated,
Mm.
and and I remember I was working at a newspaper at the time, and I had access to what was called PR Newswire, which is
Mm.
Newswire press releases. And so I remember, so it had been '93, this press release came through, and I made a copy of it, and it was announcing the settlement of the dispute between Eon/Danjak and MGM. And So it's like, okay, great. That complicated legal fight's over, but now you're starting over from scratch, and like in terms of an actual movie. Um, so yeah, so by '94, it's like you've been waiting. It's been 5 years, and the movie itself wouldn't be out for another year. But so, and I think what they did was they hired a company that did Star Trek conventions. So I think they recognized the need to kind of fire up interest again after that long stretch. But the problem was once GoldenEye came out, I guess they concluded, well, we don't have to do that anymore. And they haven't done it since.
That's really interesting that they just simply haven't. A lot of other franchises have and would, but it's just at that key point. There's a few key formative points in the Bond timeline, right? So when Connery leaves and resetting after the Cold War, and in many ways now, as a lot of people are questioning what will happen to Bond now.
Yeah, and before we started recording, we briefly talked about Amazon, and this is just my own personal opinion. It's not based on any inside knowledge whatsoever. But I guess the way I feel is I don't think a whole lot can happen until that Amazon acquisition of MGM actually closes, actually final, because I just can't see MGM trying to launch another wildly expensive movie like that before, while a new owner is in the wings, but hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, so it's a lot of money to invest in uncertain ownership or not finalized ownership. So.
Yeah.
So we are resting the franchise. We had a 6-year rest just now.
Right.
Another little rest.
Yeah, and I know No Time to Die was Daniel Craig's final one, but I did a post a couple months ago. I called it the long goodbye because they're producing a play with him, and they're still talking about it. I mean, there was this interview they did with the Times of London, and they're like complaining about him not getting any acting nominations. Like, guys, let it go. I mean, look at the history of your own series. You've never had a nomination for either acting, directing, or writing. Arguably the most artistic things you have had, cinematography. Roger Deakins with Skyfall. I consider that artistic, but
it is interesting. I mean, the lack of rewards, and also the long goodbye for Daniel Craig. They didn't do that for Pierce Brosnan.
No,
did they do that with Roger Moore? I don't think so. I think Connery had just left.
Connery, he was gone, and that was it. And they certainly did not do this like this, and they haven't done it for anybody.
And if I think of some of the other actors, I mean, Roger Moore was, the sofa king in some of the chat shows. He was fantastic. If you wanted to have a long goodbye with him, you could do that as long as you wanted, really.
Right. Well, and he was also, but he was also a great ambassador for the series because he did that in '87. He did this TV special for the 25th anniversary of the series, and there were some wonderful bits in that. And then it was essentially intended to be a handoff then, because in the I forget how long it was, if it was 1 hour or two, but anyway, and then in the last 10 minutes, you have the handoff figuratively to Timothy Dalton, and you see, some highlights of the upcoming Living Daylights. But yeah, it's just, but Barbara Broccoli just keeps talking about him. And I get it. She fought for him. She was his pick. He was her pick. I get all that, but man, just like this, it's been however many months since No Time to Die came out.
Exactly. Yes, it's very unusual. I can't think of a time in the Bond franchise when they've done it, or many other franchises, really.
Yeah.
Really exceptional.
Anyway, but just to close the loop on Bond and the Oscars. So they've been nominated 18 times, 6 times for Best Song. That seems to be that's the most popular thing for them to be nominated for. None written by John Barry, which is weird, but yeah, but they've been nominated for Live and Let Die, Nobody Does It Better, For Your Eyes Only, and the last three for best song. And of course they won two in a row.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's not that common these days for films to start off with a song title like a Bond film. I mean, I'm
right.
sometimes surprised when I watch an older film and it starts off with a song, and my feeling is, oh, just like a Bond film.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
clung on to it. So, is it fair to say there's not much competition now when when they're up
I
for
guess.
Bond?
Yeah. But also when I was growing up, I would watch the Oscars, and so when a Bond movie did get nominated, I always took note. Um, like Roger Moore ended up appearing on that Oscar show a few times. First time was 1973, and he was there with Lee Volman to present the Best Actor Oscar, and he got the gig because he's the new James Bond, and of course Marlon Brando wins, but Marlon Brando refuses the award. There's a Native American woman comes up and she waves Roger Moore off, and she reads this short speech. So that was weird. Then he was back the next year in 74 because Live and Let Die had been nominated. So he does the introduction for the song. Now, what happens with most songs nominated is, somebody performs it. If not the person who originally did it in the movie, then somebody else. But with Live and Let Die, what they did instead was they had a bunch of dancers and they just played the song from the soundtrack.
Oh.
And so you had all these dancers. But before that happened, Roger Moore does the introduction. He manages to work in a plug that I'll soon be going to Asia to work on my second James Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun.
My favorite.
Yeah. So, and then again, he was there in 82, the 40th anniversary of this. So when Alvera Broccoli got what they call the Thalberg Award, which is this, it's a lifetime achievement award for producers. And it's funny because he was mentioned right at the beginning of the telecast, the announcer, at least in the US broadcast, because, the announcer says, and here's Roger Moore, perhaps the handsomest man alive. He's here tonight to present a special award. And then, of course, he introduces, Cubby Broccoli, gives him the award. And, but they also had this, For Your Eyes Only song had been nominated, and they had this big production number. What was weird was, it was had a Moonraker theme. And there's all these kind of fakey laser blast things on the telecast. And you had Richard Keel dressed up as Jaws and Harold Sakata dressed up as Oddjob. Now some people see that don't realize it's Harold Sakata because he had lost weight. As it turned out, he was suffering from cancer. He would pass away later that year. But yeah, so you got two prime actors playing Bond henchmen, there as part of the music, as part of this number. Sheena Easton is singing the song. And also Bill Conti, who had scored For Your Eyes Only. He was the musical director for the show that night.
Wow.
So as part of this, this elaborate thing, when she wasn't singing, he kind of dropped in bits of his score into the proceedings. And you can find this on YouTube. The picture quality isn't very good, but yeah. And then one other thing about the Oscars. So 78 was interesting because it was the first time Bond film got multiple nominations. So it was nominated for song, score, and art direction, sets.
And that's for The Spy Who Loved Me?
Yes. And I remember watching it and I thought, well, I can't see, but they were up against Star Wars in terms of art direction. And I thought, I don't know about that one.
Any other year.
Yeah. If they had brought it out the year before, they probably could have gotten it. And then score, it's like, oh, you're up against John Williams. But John Williams, though, had been nominated for 2 movies. And I thought, well, maybe, the John Williams vote might get split and Hamlish can kind of slide in there and get it. But no, Williams won for Star Wars. And then, but I thought, okay, song, it's got to be the song. But no, there was it was this really sappy song. It was on radios in the US during 1977. Is just, my joke is like, you got to get an insulin shot after listening to it. You light up my life. Yeah, really. Yeah. So it went 0 for 3, like, oh no. And then, well, I don't want to recap everything. Moonraker actually got special effects nomination, but it's up against Aliens. So it's like, but I mean, I remember reading something later was, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. Derek Meddings. Yes. Derek Meddings said, listen, they were enormously proud of just getting the nomination, because they were having to use some old school techniques. They weren't doing so much of the computer stuff back then. So they were very satisfied getting the nomination.
It's interesting because later on Star Wars would suffer for the same thing. They'd be nominated and they'd be pushing boundaries, but they'd never really be recognized in awards. It's just not the kind of thing they like.
Yeah. They got nominated for, like I said, they got nominated for, they won for sets, they won for score, maybe won some other things, but of course, and it was actually nominated for Best Picture. Didn't win, but you can see on YouTube, if you know where to look, you can see The Spy Who Loved Me lose all 3 of its Oscars. Because that was also what was also weird was, so that was the 50th anniversary show. So they had this thing of like a veteran star paired with an up and coming star. Mm-hmm. So like for the sets, for example, they had Greer Garson and Henry Winkler and as the presenters, and the dialogue they speak for these award shows can be awfully stilted, and this certainly was. So it's a little painful to watch, but it's interesting to see who all they were. Like I said, they were up against Star Wars, but you can see, they show samples from all the nominees. So then for Best Score, you had Henry Mancini and a guy named Johnny Green who'd been, he was a Hollywood music type, and they were like paired with Olivia Newton-John. And so then, and then John Williams, of course, wins, and he comes up, and Henry Mancini gave him a little peck on the cheek. And then I thought, that's interesting, because I hadn't seen it for years, and I watched it like a year ago, and I thought, that's interesting. And then I remembered John Williams had once worked as a musician for Mancini. One of his first big hits was something called Peter Gunn. It's one of those things. Not many people remember the show, but they remember that theme. Yeah. And so on the original 1958 recordings, Williams was doing the piano. So it's like, oh, that's right. So at the point of that award show, they'd have known each other at least 20 years. So, and then it was Fred Astaire solo presented the best song, and this, the Bond song lost, which I still can't believe. I don't understand. Just never mind. But I won't dwell on it.
I must admit, there's a lot of these awards I don't understand.
And whatever. But the thing though about the Bond series, in terms of the crew, they've employed Oscar-worthy people from the get-go. I think Ken Adam had even been nominated before he did Dr. No, and he ended up winning a couple and was nominated for others. He doesn't, but he only got the one nomination for Bond, and he shared that nomination with Peter Lamont. Of course, Peter Lamont later won an Oscar for, I think it was Titanic. but not for Bond. And then Ted Moore, the original cinematographer, he won for a movie called A Man for All Seasons. And yeah, so which was in the mid to late 60s. And then, of course, John Barry wins five Oscars, but doesn't even get a nomination for a Bond movie, which is, I still don't understand that one.
Yeah, it does seem strange, right? These awards only have a certain type of film they rarely like to award. And
Yeah.
Bond, Star Wars, Marvel.
Yeah. Well, and for I know anecdotally there are some Bond fans that were upset that No Time to Die only got 3 nominations, but but what I tell them, listen, Spider-Man No Way Home only got 1. So and that of course is for special effects. I mean,
yeah,
occasionally. Black Panther for Marvel did get nominated for Best Picture, and it won, I think, for score. Happens occasionally. Boy, they were kind of. It took a while. It took a while to wear them down.
It did, and I have to admit, I follow some of this just on your blog. So this is where I'm getting my updates. When did you start doing this?
I started doing the blog in 2008. There used to be a website called Her Majesty's Secret Servant, and it was founded by a couple of guys in Chicago. And they invited me to be a contributor. And I was. And then they started doing, and what that was, they called it an e-magazine. So they would bring out a new issue. I'm trying to think how many times a year, a few times a year. But then they came up with the idea of doing the blog because as a way of having a presence between issues. And I wasn't sure, but I gave it a try. And eventually I just kind of was doing it a lot. And I eventually took it over. And I eventually renamed it because one of them was, because the original name was the HMSS weblog. And one of them was really, he really felt the name was proprietary. And so I said, fine, I'll just change it. But
Spike is a memorable name.
Yeah, it was funny, because when I was trying to come up with a name, my initial thing was The Command, because it was this inside joke. And The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the C stood for Command, United Network Command for Law and Enforcement. But then I slept on. I said, the commands, that's just not quite there. And then when then the next day it suddenly occurred to me, the Spy Command. Well, that's what I write about. And then, so that's how that name came about.
I'm realizing that you must have produced this blog just in time for Quantum of Solace.
Yes, well, that was why. Yeah, because the first edition was in October of 2008, and it would be out. If I remember right, it was out in the UK by the end of October, and it was like early in November in the US. But yes, that was another thing that spurred them to start the blog.
I was younger at the time, and that's I think the first one I went to see by myself.
Okay, yeah.
The World Is Not Enough in cinema. I have to say that film sparked a fire in me of the love of Bond. So it's been part of the cultural furniture before, but I think it pushed me to read the books, and then the books I went deeper and deeper. But yeah, I know it hits people very, very differently. I've lately been coming across more and more fans who are willing to come out of the woodwork and say, yes, this is a film that I like.
Right. Yeah, I'm. Admittedly, I was pretty critical. But I don't begrudge anybody. But the part, I have to admit, somebody pointed this out to me, and then but it was one of those things. Once seen, could not be unseen. Which was, it was supposed to happen 2 hours after Casino, but well, what? Mathis got that villa with a live-in girlfriend in 2 hours. And then people would say, "Oh, but it took Bond 2 years." I said, "No, it didn't." And, the flip phone. The whole point of Vesper getting Bond Mr. White's phone number was so that he could track him and track him quickly, because you couldn't assume he'd be stupid enough to hold on to a phone that long. Street criminals have burner phones. You think
He's on a Spectre budget.
yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a budget shortfall that year.
All Spectre employees must hang on to their phones so they can become radioactive at some point.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we have no money for burner phones this year. Got to hold on to it.
We've all been there with big companies.
yeah, I know. Even not so big companies. Yeah, that kind of stuff happens. But that's interesting, and so that really got you going, which I understand, and I can understand why. I mean, I think there's a better film in there if the editing had not been quite so frantic, because there's this guy does a series of videos called Haphazard Stuff, and he did really in-depth thing on Quantum of Solace, and at some point he figured out the average time for each cut, and so it's like a couple or 3 seconds with all the real frantic stuff. I mean, it's a beautiful film in terms of photography. I thought people aren't used to hearing me compliment it, but I'll give it where it's due. I thought, in particular, near the beginning of the movie, they having that horse race and the crowds and stuff. And it's that's just gorgeous. The composition, the color, and I thought David Arnold did a really good job as well.
That was his final, right? So
it was, and which is still a shame, because it used to be the Eon philosophy was we pick the composer, and once they settled on, I mean, first with John Barry, they tried to get him as often as they could, and if they couldn't, for whatever reason, then they turned to somebody else, however reluctantly. And then finally, they finally with David Arnold, they found someone they were comfortable with and brought him back. 4 times, I guess. But then they went to the model where it's the director is the primary auteur, and so it's really it's the director should pick the composer. Which is why we got Thomas Newman twice, because he had a relationship with Sam Mendes.
Yeah.
And of course, originally, No Time to Die was going to be Dan Romer, who had a relationship with Cary Fukunaga. But for whatever reason, there were interesting rumors to the effect that they found his score too much of a departure. And so they went with Hans Zimmer, or as I prefer to say, Hans Zimmer and Steve Mazzaro, because Hans Zimmer said it was the two of them, and said it more than once. But
I was listening to Hans Zimmer in an interview, and he's been very generous, saying that he's taken from David Arnold, and certainly that he relied on the other composer. He's very generous and very open about this. So.
Yeah, it was funny. I rewatched recently. I'd seen Spider-Man No Way Home, and I was curious and went back and watched the second Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie. And so the music card said music by Hans Zimmer and the Magnificent Six. So then in the end, but then later in the end title crawl, they list who the Magnificent Six were, and Mazzaro was one, Junkie UL was another, and I forget the others. And then later on in the end title crawl, it says additional music by, lists 3 people. And I'm thinking, so how much music did Hans Zimmer really do here anyway?
Is it Tom Clancy, the author, who does something similar with his spy novels? That it's Tom Clancy, but written by a whole suite of other video games, a whole suite of other writers.
Yeah, I mean, Clancy's no longer with us, but I think that was happening before he passed away.
Reasonable, he isn't doing it now. Then.
yeah, but
as I understood that he kind of developed this business model where it was his name that he was farming out, again quite openly. It's his credit, which is always nice.
Yes, Yeah. So, but anyway, and I have to admit, I did like the No Time to Die score. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised because I was kind of expecting kind of like the Dark Knight kind of thing with the brooms and things like that. And it's like, no, it was more variety. I mean, he leaned heavy on John Barry with with the song and also the theme from On Her Majesty's Secret Service woven in there. But that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the overall effect was good. And it's like I said, I was pleasantly surprised. So,
and that seems to encapsulate a lot of people's opinion of that soundtrack. Lots of people have been saying, I was worried, and it was okay.
Yeah. Which is funny. He got nominated for Dune, which Dune sounded more like his old Dark Knight stuff, but anyway.
Very atmospheric. Not very melodious, but very atmospheric.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I know there's been conversations all over the place with this, the weaving of the On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme tune into No Time to Die. How did that strike you? What did you think or feel about it?
They dropped it in a sort of odd place, I thought, because it's just M and Bond talking, outdoors. And so this music's playing. It took me a second to realize it was the theme to that. And I thought, I mean, I can't say I'm not criticizing it. I just thought it was just kind of an unusual place to drop it. I would have thought if you're going to use it, you would use it more as an action riff, but.
One person suggested to me it seemed like a placeholder track they'd forgotten to replace.
Never know.
I can see the related plots. I was watching it thinking it's a bit like the plot of On Her Majesty's Secret Service with the virus and so on, or the nanobot. Sorry.
Right. I gave when I first reviewed it, I gave it an A-. But the nanobot thing, what are these again? Nanobots sound like some kind of tech rather than a virus, and I don't know. It's
hybrid technology. It's the Star Wars thing of don't question the technology too much.
Right. Just go with it. Well, and I had been spoiled about it, so I knew Bond wasn't going to make it out of the movie alive. And I was talking to somebody, and this person did not like Bond dying. So, but like in my case, I knew it was happening, so I didn't get upset because okay, it's going to happen, and that's how it works. That's what they want to do. But so then it's like, well, they kind of pressed me. So I tried to kind of spitball an alternative where it's like, maybe he did get off, maybe he could have gotten off the island. And then you have a scene. So like the last scene of the movie is like Bond's funeral, but he's really alive and he's like watching from a distance. He knows he can't get any closer, but I mentioned this idea and I said, well, he could touch almost anybody and it would eventually spread to Madeline and Mathilde and it's like, well, the tech acts that way because they wanted it to act that way. So coming up with all this alternative stuff, it's like unless you're had an open mind about reversing your decision, wasn't going to happen. So I
must admit, my own perspective, I didn't find it too shocking because we've seen the death of name your comic book, the death of Superman, the death of Lois Lane, the death of however many,
right.
And this has just been a separate run like a comic book edition. We talked earlier about how it's been influenced by Batman and maybe Marvel. So it's just one more take, really.
Well, and of course, once upon a time, Daniel Craig did a play with Hugh Jackman. And Hugh Jackman ended his run on Wolverine with Wolverine getting killed.
Yeah.
And, and there's, I wrote about this. There's this kind of genre of, where the hero falls, but he falls heroically. And, you have in biblical things. I mean, like Samson and Delilah, Samson's like taking down the temple with him. And he dies, but he triumphs. And, you had that in Marvel, the Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark dying, but, he takes down the threat of Thanos as he does so. So for that reason, I could see why they did it. And plus, I mean, it was like the one ending they hadn't done yet.
Yeah.
in the Craig series.
Yeah. If it was him walking away or him quietly going to retirement, we've seen it all before. So
right,
they had to go somewhere new.
Yeah. So, and then I just think, well, okay, they can do a reboot, start over. But boy, there are some people they're not letting go of this.
Yeah.
He's dead. You can't come back. Well, it's not him per se. It's another version of him. It's another universe. It's another. It's
yeah.
A friend of mine. We'll call him Jim from Detroit. We talked about this, and he said, James Bond is kind of going in the direction of Batman, in the sense of like, look, every time, it's like one Batman ends his run, start over with a new Batman, and like, okay, I think maybe that's what we'll do now with James Bond. It's like whenever they get around to casting a new Bond, well, start over. This one's alive, even if the previous one isn't. I'm
very curious how hard of a reboot it's going to be, because if we've changed main actors, what's keeping everyone else the same?
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, though. If to use that Batman example, they recast everybody. So each Batman gets his own Commissioner Gordon. Each Batman gets his own Alfred. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because what was it? You had J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon with Ben Affleck. Now you've got Jeffrey Wright with the new guy, Robert Pattinson. Yes, yeah. Yeah, if they don't change that supporting cast, that would make it weird, because I don't know. We'll see. But
we'll see. If the franchise was in your hands, I don't know if you'd want it in your hands, but if it was in your hands, what would you be doing with it?
Well, I would have to admit I'd be lightening it up. I'm not Roger Moore light, but I think, boy, we've had this prolonged period of somber. And I think it's kind of time to like lighten it up. I think I would at least lessen continuity, not worry about it as much. I mean, the thing is with the Craig films, they did it retroactively, because I mean, in 2011, they had the press conference, and Sam Mendes explicitly said, no, this movie Skyfall has nothing to do with the two previous movies. And then when they do Spectre, oh, well, it turns out Silva really worked for Spectre. Really? Yeah. Like, did they approve of all this? Like, what was don't think about it too much, but yeah, they shoehorned that in. Don't, unless you're prepared to really plot out multiple films, then I would just kind of de-emphasize it. I mean, in the early movies did have a little bit of continuity, because like from Russia with Love, Kronstein says, as an added refinement, Spectre will have a chance for personal revenge for the killing of our operative, Dr. No. And then when Bond arrives at the Istanbul airport, it's staged in a similar manner to when he arrived in the Kingston airport, but then they switch it up. Because a guy that Bond isn't expecting approaches him, but the guy knows the recognition phrase, so I guess I'll go with him. But yeah, I mean, it looks very similar, and you get a similar feel. It helps, of course, you have the same director for both movies. And then in Goldfinger, Bond says something about Jamaica. I can't quite make it after all these times of seeing. I still can't quite make out what he's saying about Jamaica, but clearly they got a lot closer to you in Jamaica, didn't they? So it's obviously a reference to Dr. No. That's all you need.
Yeah. And you were saying you first got in with Thunderball, and that has the femme fatale remarking on clearly on Pussy Galore.
Yes, yeah, but not this one.
Exactly. Highlight of the film,
which is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and the thing was, by doing it that way, okay, if you'd seen Goldfinger, you knew what she was talking about. But if you hadn't, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Things do not depend that much on it. It's again, if you've seen it, it's fine. You haven't seen it, well, you're not lost.
Yes. It's not like the Marvel films where I'm watching this film not so much because I enjoy it, but because I have to watch this one to understand the next one.
Yes.
So something lighter. It's interesting that the most recent film, the most positive thing, people are talking about Paloma and the Cuba scene, which is probably the lightest and most fun bit.
Yes, it was like this, I don't know, 10, 15 minute thing of fresh air.
Yeah.
More please. I mean, not necessarily her specifically, but something like that mood. And you can still have serious moments. I mean, even like in the Connery films, they had serious moments. For example, in Thunderball, he goes into Largo's estate. He's trying to rescue Paula, fellow agent, but it turns out she's dead because she took the cyanide pill. And so there's this moment. He looks at her. There's this, sad John Barry music, but he can't dwell on. He's got to get out of there. So it's like, but he clearly, that moment registers. And then in the next movie, when Aki gets poison intended for Bond, again, John Barry music. It's like, Connery Bond is not laughing it off by any means. And it's you don't have to be 2.5, 3 hours of somberness.
Yeah, it takes a certain accomplished touch with this filmmaking to have it just enough, but not.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be a hammer.
Right.
I think I quite like the Bond films that you would run.
which of course now guarantees will never happen. But
well, thank you very much for giving me your perspective on the Bond films and your life, kind of following them through. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, Thomas, thank you for having me. I had a great time, and best of luck with the podcast in the future.
Thank you very much. And everyone can find you on the Spy Command, right?
Right, which the URL is hmssweblog.wordpress.com. Down the left side, there are links to some other websites of mine. I have something called the Spy Command Feature Story Index. Again, you find the blog, you can get the link to that. That contains the infamous Bond 25 timeline.
It is infamous.
Yeah. Well, I have started a Bond 26 timeline. Not very many entries right now, but I also have websites devoted to a couple TV shows. One's The Man from U.N.C.L.E., of course, which was actually my very first foray to the internet. And the other is an American TV show just called The FBI. It's from the 60s and 70s. It's a show I like, and I kind of did it as a challenge because I had, it was on for 9 years. I had like a lot of episodes. So
doing all those Ford on it, is that right?
They did. They had two episodes. And you can see a clip. Go to YouTube and and punch up "The Professor Beats Up Harrison Ford," and you will see this clip. And the professor, the actor's name was Russell Johnson. He played the professor on Gilligan's Island. In this episode, he's like a head of a spy ring, and Harrison Ford stumbles in on it, and they get into a fight, and it's a good episode, but it is kind of funny given what happened, how Harrison Ford became a big star.
Yeah.
And you hear sort of the usual exaggerated punching sound effects.
Classic TV show. We'll have to check out the clip.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks again for having me.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to Bill Koenig for being a fantastic guest, and thank you for downloading, for listening. If you enjoyed it, please do give me an honest 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you download this. You can also find me on www.youtube.com/British Culture. Plenty of content coming up real soon. Thank you.